Hello, my name is Horama, and today I have found a few strange encounters people have experienced with the various mythical and supernatural forces of the world from the No Sleep subreddit, and will be narrating them here. But before we begin, I did want to ask that if you end up enjoying my narrations, then please do consider liking and subscribing, as that really does help the channel a lot. But either way, without any further ado, let's get into the narrations. The first story has been posed by user Sleepless from Sundown. An encounter with a Wendigo. At 1 minute to midnight, I took out the shot glass and put it beside the bottle of Jägermeister. I don't drink anymore after what happened to Pop. The one exception is the first day of September. The house is dark, except for the warm glow of the 3 bulbs above the dining room table. I rub my tongue against the inside of my cheek. My mouth always goes dry. The only sound is the incessant ticking of the wall-mounted clock. At midnight, the soft bell sounds, a miniature version of church bells. I fill the glass and hold it aloft for a second, and swallow with a deep breath. The subtle burn winds its way into my throat and stomach. I wash the shot glass by the light of the moon shining through the kitchen window. Loretta wouldn't mind my drinking, but a used shot glass beside the sink raises questions, and I never like to talk about it. All these years later, I still have nightmares. What I saw up on that mountain left a greater impression than any other event in my life. More than my children being born and my father drinking himself into an early grave. Loretta tells me I should talk about it, that it would help. She might be right. She always is. So here goes. I joined the park ranger service right out of school, and it was a perfect fit. I took to academics like a fish to the desert, and the outdoors always called. I passed my time in school daydreaming of the weekend and hiking or fly fishing with Pop. In the summer of '89, I was stationed in the Appalachians. Our jurisdiction encompassed trails leading all the way up the mountain. Up there, the spruce thin out and the clouds hang heavy, even in fine weather at the base. I spent the summer clearing fallen branches from the walking trails after a couple of vicious storms over the winter. It was hack work, reserved for the junior, but the truth of it was, I didn't mind. The peak of summer heat was spent, and visitor numbers dropped as the weather began to turn. Persistent drizzle had kept me desk-bound for the morning, and we were about to go get lunch when he burst through the door. He let out a moan and collapsed to the floor. Stanley leaned down and propped him in a seated position, water dripping from his shoulder-length hair. His limbs hung limp by his side. I handed Stanley a cup of water. Stanley used his index finger to push down his chin. The water hit his tongue. The man tensed, and his eyelids flickered open. He flailed his limbs and knocked the glass from Stanley's hand. The glass shattered on the floor, but the man paid it no mind. "It's out there," he said. "What is?" The man half turned and gripped Stanley's shirt and made balls with his fists. He repeated himself, pausing after each word. It is out there. He started to sob. He released his grip on Stanley and buried his face in his hands. We lifted him onto a chair and he pressed his face against the table and bawled. I grabbed the rucksack he had dropped to the floor. On the bottom right was a name tag behind the plastic sleeve. Lenny Porter from San Diego. There was a number at the bottom. "I'll make the call," Stanley said. When Stanley returned, Lenny was sat up, staring blankly at the wall with red eyes. His face was gaunt, like he hadn't eaten in a week. Stanley closed the door. "I spoke to your father." Lenny didn't acknowledge his words. He sat motionless and unblinking. Stanley shuffled across to where I was sitting and pressed his palm on the table. Lenny left San Diego 2 weeks ago with a couple of friends. They planned to spend a month hiking the trail north. The father gave me 2 names, Freddie and Sabrina. When he heard their names, Lenny leaned over and picked up his backpack. He rummaged frantically until he pulled out a stack of Polaroids. He flicked through the photographs and then slapped one on the table. Stanley and I leaned over. Flanking a fitter and healthier Lenny were what must have been Freddie, tall and wearing a baseball cap, and Sabrina, shorter and wearing a bright yellow top with an almost fluorescent blue belt pulling the fabric tight around her waist. Lenny pointed to the photo, and tears welled up in his eyes. "What happened to them?" He sobbed and shook his head. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Stanley took a map down from the wall and pushed it in front of Lenny. "We are here. Where did you last see them?" Lenny blinked away the tears and concentrated. He squinted at the map and pressed his index finger down and tapped it. Stanley took a pencil from his breast pocket and marked the map with a cross. "I'll notify the police. Get the truck ready to go." During training, they told us about search and rescue operations. The Rangers are the first responders. It was part of the job. Twisted ankles and wandering off the trail and getting lost are not uncommon, and no reason to get the police involved. But this, it felt different. I secured the gear in the truck, and Stanley appeared, flanked by a police officer in his early 30s. "Harry's hitching a ride. His partner will take care of Lenny." We drove up the trail for about 15 minutes with the truck until it grew too narrow and treacherous. We split up the gear between us and set out on foot. Our destination was high up the mountain and far away from the trails. It was almost as if the trails deliberately avoided the area. We hacked our way through the thick forest. How had they ended up all the way out here? Stanley checked his watch constantly as we climbed. He wanted to get there before dark. I figured we would be lucky if we did. Stanley and Harry talked like old friends, asking about each other's wives and children. The park rangers are in effect an extension of law enforcement. It made sense to be friendly with the police, and living in a small mountain town made it almost inevitable. I liked that. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Stanley checked the map. "Almost there. Get your torches ready." All right. Harry reached into his backpack and pulled out a flashlight. I did the same. Do you know what's up this way? Stanley said. I shook my head. Somewhere up here is an old cabin. Hunters used it as a base back when you could still hunt up this way. The cross our friend Lenny put on the map is just about on top of it, I think. Let's see if we can get there before there's no light left. We didn't make it by dark. Twilight gave to night with little warning. Soon, we were relying on the light from our torches. Being on a trail in the sunshine lends a sense of security up here, even when you are alone. Now, surrounded by black and with a trail long behind us, an uneasiness grew in my stomach for the first time. Stanley paused and swept his torch. He muttered something under his breath. Harry took a few steps to the right, lowering his head and squinting. There it is, he said. At the farthest reaches of Harry's torchlight, the cabin emerged from the woods. Stanley tapped Harry on the shoulder. My eyes just aren't what they used to be. The cabin should have been a source of comfort, but it only added to my unease. The roof was half caved in, and trees encroached on all sides, gnarled branches reaching out like fingers. The structure looked like it belonged more to the forest than to man. The only door hung askew on warped and rusted hinges. Two windows had long ago lost their glass. Stanley shouldered open the door with a grunt. Leaves and branches covered the floor, blown in through the open windows and roof. We dumped the gear inside. Stanley took out a lantern and tied it to a horizontal branch a few paces from the front door. He flicked it on, and the light shone bright. If there was anyone lost nearby, they could not fail to see it. We split up and entered the forest, guided by our torches. Stanley instructed us to go no further than the reach of the lantern. It was our lighthouse on the horizon. The wind blew in fresh from the north. I buttoned up my jacket against the cold. The beam from the torch was strong, but aside from the narrow cone of light, the forest was a deep and full dark. Stanley and Harry called out the names of the two missing, Freddie and Sabrina. I did the same. Every few steps I stopped and listened. The forest was alive with a scurrying of animals and insects going about their business, and the constant rustling of the wind through the leaves. It was hopeless. This was a needle in the haystack kind of thing. Freddie and Sabrina could be unconscious on the ground a few feet to my left, and I would never see them. We should camp and wait for first light. Harry's voice got through the night, louder and with urgency. I skipped toward the sound as fast as I dared. The two torchlights of Harry and Stanley played close together, the beams of light trained on the forest floor. You might not want to see this, Stanley said as I came up behind them. It was too late. By the light of the torches, I saw him, flat on his back, arms and legs bent at an unnatural angle. I almost gagged when I saw his face. The left side caved in. A red, bloody mess fragmented the white of the skull. The right side was intact, one green eye staring up, wide and unmoving. The remainder of the face had an almost serene expression. It was not the look of fear that you would expect from someone about to have half of their face crushed. No skin remained below the neck. The contents of his torso picked so clean that I could see his full spine. "What did that?" I stammered. I didn't get an answer. Stanley fished a Polaroid from his pocket and studied it under torchlight. He handed it to Harry. "It's him. It's Freddy." Harry jumped and swung his torch out into the woods. "I swear I heard someone talking out there," Harry said. "We've been calling out their names too." No, it wasn't that. It sounded like whispering. "It's just the wind through the trees. Don't worry about it." Harry didn't look convinced. He called out the name of Sabrina and listened. Only the sounds of the forest responded. Stanley shushed him. "There's nothing we can do for the boy now. Let's get back to the cabin and radio down the news." Stanley took a few quick steps towards the cabin and motioned for us to follow. He seemed agitated. I didn't blame him. I followed on his heels. Harry lingered, searching the woods with his torch until he too fell in behind. The inside of the cabin felt like a sanctuary, out of the wind and removed from the mangled corpse of Freddy. My mind processed the sight. I had gutted my fair share of fish, but this was different. I put my hand to my stomach and swallowed hard. I was overcome with a compulsion to repeat my unanswered question. What could have done that? Before I could, Harry gave us some more bad news. There was no response on the radio, only static. It wasn't surprising. The cabin sat in a depression between the peak we crested on our way in and the taller peak beyond. "We have to go back," I said. Harry shook his head. "Not in the dark, and not when there's still someone out there." "We don't know if that girl is dead or alive," Stanley said. "I heard her." "You heard a whisper is what you said. And if she was there, she would have come to the light. She'll come to the lantern, and we will wait for her." Harry threw out his arms in protest. Stanley sighed. "If she's dead, then we'll find her in the light of the morning. If she's alive and nearby enough to whisper in our ears, then she will come to us." Two rectangles of light shone through the open windows from the lantern outside, but the front room of the cabin still had dark, shadowy corners. Stanley took a second lantern and tied it to an old light fixture hanging from the ceiling. The room lit up as if under sunlight, but a cold light gave the moon a bare and unwelcome feel. I busied myself clearing the space on the floor beside a black potbelly stove at the rear end of the room. Stanley and Harry stood as statues, staring up at the wall behind me. I turned. Etched in black soot onto the blank wall was some kind of monster, long-limbed with an elongated skull. It stared back at us through white blobs left clear of black. I took a step back and almost stumbled. "What is that?" I didn't need an answer. You don't live and work up in the mountains here without hearing the stories. Stories told dismissively by daylight, like you would talk about the monsters you imagined hiding in your closet as a kid. By night, and around a campfire, the stories take on a graver tone, and the name of the monster is only ever whispered. Of course, I had never seen such a monster, but if I had to imagine what one might look like, the painting in soot taking up the full height of the wall of the cabin was an exact match. I waited for one of the two men behind me to dismiss what we saw drawn on the wall, to make light of it and crack a joke. Neither did. Stanley uttered a simple instruction. No one goes outside without a weapon. Our shadows danced on the walls. The lantern hanging from the ceiling did not move. Stanley leaned in and looked out the window. The lantern hanging from the tree branch swung back and forth like the pendulum of a grandfather clock. There was wind tonight, but not enough to do that. Stanley bent down and fished a rifle from the bag. My heart beat like a drum in my ears. And then something else. Whispers. What sounded like the whispers of a girl, inviting us out into the darkness of the forest. Stanley inched open the door with the muzzle of his rifle. He stepped through the gap and watched the lantern on the tree come to a rest. He stood beside the lantern and searched the corners of the forest, illuminated by the light. Nothing moved. Harry unclipped the leather strap on his belt and drew a pistol and went to the doorway. I felt naked and exposed with my hands empty. I took a step backwards, the Wendigo drawn in soot, looming large behind and burning a hole in the back of my head. A shadow flashed through the trees, and Stanley swung the muzzle of his rifle and shot, the crack piercing the night. He raised the rifle to his shoulder and flicked it from side to side, searching for movement. The lantern bobbed up and down. With a rush, a long-limbed creature dropped onto Stanley from above. He screamed and wrenched the rifle round, but had it knocked from his grip. Harry fired 2 shots, and the creature let out a wail. It bounded towards the door, and Harry slammed it shut. He pointed the pistol to the closed door and emptied the chamber. Harry took a step back and shot me a glance. Through the whole ordeal, I had not moved. I had barely breathed. Was it dead? Was Stanley okay? "The window!" I screamed. The long, thin fingers of the creature wrapped themselves around the inside of the window frame. Then the head appeared, uncannily human-like, but distorted and disfigured. The chin elongated, and the teeth like razors and drenched in blood. Its eyes, white and piercing, just like the etchings on the wall. Harry grabbed me by the arm and hauled me into the back room of the cabin. He slammed shut the flimsy door. The back room was windowless, and the only light was a thin strip at the base from the lantern in the front room. We crouched together, our shoulders pressed against the door. We listened. The light patter of footsteps. Two thin strips of black interrupted the strip of light at the base of the door. Something stood on the other side. "Come out. It's okay." It sounded like Stanley. Had he killed it? "Come out." Harry straightened, and I grabbed his shoulder. "Don't open the door," I whispered. "They say a Wendigo can imitate those it kills." My hand brushed against Harry's back and knocked the flashlight from his jacket pocket. I fumbled in the darkness until I found it, and I flicked it on. I scanned the room for something, anything we could use as a weapon. I walked away from the door and kicked at the twigs and leaves on the floor. All that was good for was kindling. Something smelled rotten. There must be a dead rat somewhere. "It's Stanley," Harry said. I pointed the torch to him. His eyes were wide and wild. He must have killed it." He smiled at me and took a step back. The door slammed open and carried with it the rotten stench. What stood in the doorway was not Stanley, but the creature. Harry kneeled before it, breathing in the noxious fumes. I shone the torch onto the creature, its gray skin pulled tight on a gaunt frame. And then something glinted, a belt buckle. Around the creature's waist was the bright blue belt Sabrina wore in the Polaroid. "Sabrina?" I said. It turned to me and paused, tilting its head to the side. I thought I saw a glimmer of recognition, a brief moment where it knew the name. But then it snarled, its mouth opening wide and dripping with saliva. It wrapped two hands around the neck of Harry and leaned in. I acted instinctively, without thinking. I jumped at the creature, swinging the only weapon I had, the torch. I brought it down on its head with all the strength and adrenaline I had. It bucked and sent me flying into the room beyond. I threw out my hands against the fall and grabbed the lantern. Stanley had hung from the ceiling. It could not bear my weight, and the cord pulled out from the ceiling, and I fell with a thud. I jumped up at a burst of warmth from my stomach. The lantern had smashed on impact, and the white-hot filament broke free of its casing. I groaned in pain as the creature lumbered forwards. I retreated into the corner of the room and pulled my knees up to my chest. It stood over me and opened its mouth, razor-sharp teeth gleaming white. Then the smell of smoke. The creature hopped and then scrambled backwards. The leaves and twigs covering the floor ignited under the heat from the lamp filament. A small flame burst up, and the creature covered its face. Fire. It didn't like fire. I crawled forwards and swept as much of the kindling as I could onto the flames. The fire grew and the creature screamed. As smoke filled the room, it coughed and spluttered. It made one last effort to come at me, and then retreated out of the room and into the forest. I went into the back room and grabbed Harry. We stumbled out of the cabin, the fire now spreading up to the walls and to the roof. Stanley lay below the lantern hung from the tree, unmoving and with a chunk of flesh missing from his throat. We ran into the forest in the opposite direction the creature had gone. We climbed up to the crest and then back down the mountain. We stumbled our way down by the light of the torch. Adrenaline coursed through our veins, and we imagined that thing right behind us, stalking us in the dark. When we finally crossed the trail, we followed it back down to the ranger station. A team of police and National Guard hiked up to the cabin after the sun rose. The cabin had burned to the ground. The potbelly stove, the only item that survived the blaze. The bodies of Stanley and Freddie were brought down. They said Stanley's flesh had been picked clean down to the skeleton. That was the first day of September, 1989. Sabrina was listed as a missing person, and her father spent a month in the mountains searching for her. But she's gone in every sense that matters, turned into a Wendigo by hunger for human flesh. She transformed into something unrecognizable from where it began. Around campfires, people still tell stories of the Wendigo. I don't know if they truly believe they are out there, but I know I have seen it. Sometimes there really is a monster in the closet. The next story has been posed by user CJ Phillips 612. I think I saw a Wendigo through the train window. It is as the title states. I am fairly certain that I saw a Wendigo out the window of a train. If that were the only event that happened, then I wouldn't have much reason to tell my story. In order to get into what happened, let me start off at the beginning of my day. It was a normal Saturday, as far as I was concerned. I stayed up until 3 a.m., playing the newest online mobile game with my brothers. Yes, I know it is considered a sin to cheat by using my brother's screens to determine who the imposter is, but I'm not getting to that debate right now. I woke up not too long after 9 a.m., played on my phone a while, and then hopped out of bed. Threw on the same clothes I had on the day before, and headed downstairs to the kitchen. I threw together my favorite breakfast food, while my brothers both dragged their feet to meet me. My twin brother, Gabe, decided to shower to wake himself up, while my younger brother, Zach, decided to partake in the feast of homemade waffles with peanut butter and chocolate milk. By the time Gabe was dressed and sitting at the kitchen table, Zach and I had already finished putting the dishes into our dishwasher and cleaned off the table. I had packed in advance, and my train wasn't for a few more hours, so my brothers and I had pulled our phones out and began terrorizing the servers of Among Us for a little while. After we grew tired from the online insults and cyberbullying that we received for cheating, we played some Mortal Kombat on our PS4. It was a very relaxing morning, all things considered. As I prepared to collect my luggage and leave for the train station, I reiterated the food plans to my siblings. The roast is in the slow cooker. All you have to do is clean up. It's going to be finished at 6 today, and if you aren't sure if it's done, then shoot me a picture. I continued speaking over Gabe's attempts of assuring me that they'd be fine without me. Remember, tomorrow is oven-baked chicken fingers and fries. After school Monday is burgers, and you can order anything you want for Tuesday, and pay a tip. I rushed my sentence as Gabe held the front door of our tiny rented house open for me. Chrissy, we'll be fine, okay? Chill out, yeah? Gabe chuckled to himself. You're right, yeah, you'll be fine. Do your homework. I love you guys. See you on Wednesday. I called to them as I headed down the paved driveway and towards the bus stop down the road. As Zach yelled his goodbyes towards me, I couldn't help but smile. They'll be fine. I raised them well, I thought to myself. I looked at them waving in the open front door and gave them a very flat and stern expression. I'll be back. I deepened my voice as best as possible before smiling and heading back towards the bus stop. My parents were extremely busy people all our lives. Gabe was born with a learning disability and required more attention from my parents than I needed. I had to grow up and mature faster to be able to take care of Gabe, as our mother was a full-time principal in our local school and a part-time student tutor, while my father worked as a warehouse manager full-time and was often working the midnight shifts. He worked those shifts due to the employees' reputations to be unproductive. He always said he needed to straighten them out. My father would sleep all day and my mother would work all day. I would always prepare Gabe's lunches and walk him to school, walk him home and make him dinner. I helped him with his homework. I read him bedtime stories. I tucked him into bed. I was always there for him. Zach was born a week before my 9th birthday with Gabe. By now, Gabe had quickly matured, surprising everyone. He was potentially even smarter and more socially acceptable than I was, though he didn't have the same parenting skills that I had developed, and therefore wasn't entirely confident in even turning on an oven or setting a microwave timer. Anyways, by the time Zach came around, I was well aware that I would have to raise him as well. I so desperately wanted my mom and dad to be real parents for little Zach, to be there for him, and be what Gabe and I never had. But I knew, deep down, that that would never happen. By the time Gabe and I were 18 and Zach had just turned 9, the three of us moved out and into our own apartment. I wasn't even sure that our parents would notice Zach's absence, to be honest. After all, they had no issues with us all moving in together. They said to me themselves that they knew Zach was better off with us than them. They said he was never supposed to be, which entirely angered me. Because of this, Gabe and I started to call Zach our miracle brother. Despite our age gap, the three of us were extremely close with one another. It was us three against the world, and nobody could change that. Then, about a year ago, I fell in love with my old high school crush. His name is Brian. We were always close friends since grade 9, but as high school came to a close and we parted ways for university, we confessed our love. It was a very corny movie moment to me. Even though long distance, we made our relationship work. Gabe and Zach were obviously jealous that Brian was taking all of my attention. They were afraid that Brian was going to take me away from them. All that aside, they liked my boyfriend. They were all friendly and had good laughs together. They were happy for us. So, here I am, at a train station awaiting my train to my boyfriend on our first year anniversary. I anxiously awaited the train, wondering with me when I got back. Maybe they were mad already, or maybe they aren't upset at all. I talked myself into thinking that I was doing the right thing, even though my stomach was turning violently. I was feeling nauseous. It had nothing to do with what I ate. I had a horrible feeling. Something inside me was telling me that something bad was going to happen. But I didn't listen to it at the time. I thought it was all just the nerves of traveling. I was just too excited to see Brian. The train was quite long. It went from my small little town of southern Ontario to the northern and frigid climate that is stereotypically portrayed as all of Canada. Overall, the trip to Brian's apartments was close to 12 hours, I think. However, that includes the train ride along with a bus and the drive that Brian has to take from his apartment to where I arrive on the train and then back to his apartment. I had boarded the train and had been seated when one of the train staff members asked to scan my ticket. I quickly apologized for not being prepared and dug through my luggage to find my ticket. After ensuring that I was settled and asking if I had wanted any food or drink for the ride, the staff member had moved along down the aisle. I looked around the car, noticing only 3 other passengers before pulling out my laptop from my bag and popping my headphones into my ears. I sent a text to my parents informing them of my absence from my hometown for the next few days and threw on some YouTube. Gaming channels were always a favorite, but recently Gabe had got me hooked onto a game theory channel. I could sit there for hours watching the different conspiracy theories about video game lore, and for the first half of my trip, that's exactly what I did. The early winter sunset filled the skies with orange and pink highlights as I had decided to put my laptop away and watch the window with my music playlist on. I had always enjoyed listening to music on long trips, especially across the country. I tried to imagine cheesy movie scenes taking place in the open fields with slow songs playing and faceless couples slow dancing. Within about an hour after I first peered out my window, the snow had begun. At first it was a light flurry, hardly visible as the train sped along the tracks, but eventually it was a blizzard. Simply looking outside gave me chills, as I never enjoyed being in the snow. Snow is pretty, but only from afar, I'd always say. I shivered underneath my thick leather jacket as the train came to a slow stop in a remote northern town. This was not my stop, as the train station itself was visibly the largest building in the entire town. Anyone could stand on one end of the town and see the other side down the road, even in the blizzard-like conditions that were present. As the train waited, I kept my eyes focused outside my window. No passengers had left the car, and no additional passengers had boarded. I found this to be very strange, as the train needed to always stay on schedule. Little time was available for simply stopping. There must have been something wrong with one of the employees, or maybe even the conductor, or possibly even the train itself. Attention, passengers, we apologize for the delay. We will continue on our trip in 5 minutes. Once again, we apologize for the delay. We thank you for choosing to ride with us and enjoy your evening. The overhead speakers broke through my thoughts and pulled me back into reality. I simply looked around the car for a moment and then texted Brian to let him know the 5 minute delay. When I looked outside my window again, that was when I saw it. The tall figure was hunched over with its back towards me. I could see the back of its white skull and its antlers broken and distorted. It was extremely frail, its limbs impossibly long and spindly. The creature was in the tree line across the town. Hardly any specific details were noticeable through the extreme snow. However, I recognized right away what this creature was. Doubt had settled in almost as fast as the creature seemed to appear. Has it always been there? Was my mind playing tricks on me? It became more and more obvious the longer I gawked at it. How had I not noticed it until now? What the hell? I whispered under my breath. At the moment, I was so quiet that I wasn't even sure I had said it out loud. Just as soon as I questioned, the creature whirled its head at near 180-degree angle to face directly at me. The black pits for eyes stared deep into my soul. This creature had heard me, and now it had seen me. I was sure of it. Its mouth unhinged, and an animal's corpse fell out, blood spilling everywhere. Whatever this creature had been consuming was far too mangled to determine what it really was. The train jolted to life and crawled across the tracks, gradually gaining speed. I was startled from the sudden movement and nearly jumped out of my seat. The creature only stared as I sped off. I scrambled to get my laptop out of my bag and reconnected to the train's Wi-Fi. I spent the last 2.5 hours of my trip researching this creature. This is where I learned of its name, the Wendigo. This creature had been a part of native folklore for many generations. I nearly couldn't hold my dinner in when I read about the stories of cannibals becoming Wendigos hundreds of years ago. After reading other people's close encounters online, I was more and more convinced that what I saw was real. I was ready to move on and forget about my encounter with this creature by the time I stepped off the train. I practically fell into Brian's arms and broke down. A mixture of fear and emotions of sadness and loneliness overtaking me all at once. I was grateful to be there with him, in his arms when I needed him the most. I told him about my encounter with the cryptid on the drive back to his apartment. I believe that you definitely saw something, he began, his doubt unintentionally present in his voice. I just don't think that a creature like that exists at all. Like, how come the only solid proof of its existence are all tall tales and folklore? I don't know, Brian. I quietly looked at my feet. He reached one of his hands off the wheel and held mine firmly and reassuringly. I don't know what it is. I guess it felt very real. Well, that's good enough for me, he said calmly. That's enough reason for me to keep you safe. And so a small grin formed on his face. Throughout the entire car ride, he reassured me that all is fine, and eventually I believed him. Brian had managed to make me forget all about my terrible experience hours ago. We were laughing and joking around as he pulled into his parking space in his apartment complex. The building itself hadn't been very tall, only about 10 stories. The building was nearly completely surrounded by dark Canadian woods. His town wasn't very large, about 8,000 residents, I think. Beautiful, lush evergreen forests surrounded the little city, with nearly every house having its own tree in the front lawn. Sparkling white snowflakes gently fell around me as I stepped out of Brian's car. The parking lot was lightly covered in snow before I had managed to make it to the entrance of the building. Brian, like the gentleman he is, carried my luggage from the car to the apartment. He was talking about one of the regular customers at his fast food part-time job when I cut him off. "Listen," I said, in a hushed whisper. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Goosebumps formed all over my body. Someone was watching us. I could feel it. I scanned the tree line, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. I don't hear anything," he said. "Exactly. It's so quiet. There weren't any noises around, not a single sound, only the eerie, dead silence." "Is it always this quiet?" I questioned him. "In the middle of the night? Well, yeah, it is." Brian wasn't making me feel any better. "What's wrong? Are you still spooked?" "Let's just go inside. I don't like it out here." I clung onto his arm and rushed towards the front doors. Once inside and in the elevator, I told him what I read online. I explained that the absence of any natural noises or wild animals typically means that there's a predator around. With his apartment complex close to some dark woods, I wasn't very calm. I also told him how I felt that we were being watched from something in the woods. Just relax. Your nerves are probably just shot." He held me close to him, trying to calm me down. "I promise, it's safe here. Whatever you saw is gone." He drifted off. That night, I dreamed that the creature had followed us. I saw from its point of view as it followed our car towards Brian's apartment. I saw as it watched us get out from the car and head inside. I saw as it crawled into bed behind me, holding me in place. "Don't move," it hissed, its hot breath on my ear. I woke up in a cold sweat. Brian was sound asleep behind me, looking peaceful as ever. I went to the kitchen and got myself a glass of water. I put on my warm, fuzzy housecoat over top my pajamas and stood outside on the balcony. Some fresh air would do me good. At least, that's what I thought to myself. It was 3:20 in the morning, and there I was on the balcony of the 7th floor, contemplating a cigarette. I wanted to quit ever since I had taken ownership of my brother, but on that balcony I felt as though I had so desperately needed one. Feeling ashamed of myself for even considering it, I threw the only cigarette I had off the balcony. I needed to get a hold of myself before I returned home. I could not let Zach see me like this. Gabe would scold me if he were here, I thought. Wiping tears off my face, I looked around the tree line. I was just starting to regain my composure when I noticed something out of place. In the tree line was the deer skull. The horrid creature's body was undoubtedly attached to it. It just stared at me. I whirled around and nearly dove inside Brian's apartment. I slammed the balcony glass door shut and locked it. As I headed to make sure the front door was locked, Brian intercepted me, forcing a scream out of me. "What's the matter, Christina?" Brian held me by my arms. I wouldn't stop wailing. All that I could get out of was, "It's following me," in between the sobs. He held me in a close hug until it was calm enough to explain my nightmare and about the creature I saw mere moments ago. "Stay here," he said as he headed toward the balcony and took a step outside. I watched as he unlocked the door and looked outside onto the balcony. A chill went down my spine, but not because of the wintry night air flowing into the apartment. Brian just stood there, staring at one spot. After a long pause, he slowly backed into the apartment, not taking his eyes off of whatever he saw outside. But I knew he saw it. I knew he believed me. I could see it in his face, his eyes wide with fear, his mouth only slightly ajar. Without looking at me, he said, "The parking lot is in the back of the complex. Get your things. We can't stay here." "Are you crazy? That thing is outside. It's following me," I nearly yelled, panic setting in. I felt as though I was going to vomit. "That thing," it told me. Brian was in terror. I don't know how, but it told me that it was going to come inside. I gasped, tears streaming down my face. "We have to go," he urged. I grabbed his hand and he grabbed his keys, and we rushed out the front door. We ran to the elevator and rapidly hit the down button. I decided that taking the stairs was faster and bolted through the door towards the stairs, Brian following right behind me. Reaching the stairwell, I looked to the bottom before descending the stairs. About halfway down the first flight, I heard heavy tapping coming from the bottom. I leaned over the banister and saw the undead deer creature making its way up the stairs. Brian nearly bumped into me as I spun around and sprinted up the stairs, crying and screaming. He followed my lead without question as I headed toward the elevator doors, just about to open. We both cramped ourselves in the door, and Brian rapidly pushed the ground floor button. Just as the double doors closed, we saw the stairwell doorway open and the animal's snout making its way towards us. We held each other, Brian verbally praying, and me regretting most of my life's past choices. Ground floor and parking. The elevator dinged, cueing us to make our hasty escape. We ran like our lives depended on it, because in those moments, they surely did. On our way to Brian's car, I slipped and fell into the snow. Brian, who was ahead of me, turned around and prepared to help me up. "No, just go, start the car, please go," I yelled frantically as I slowly made my way to my feet. He spun around and ran towards the car again. I took one step forward and fell to my knees, pain pulsing through my ankle. I loudly groaned in pain, clenching my teeth. I managed to get to my feet and half limp, half jog to the car. Just as I closed the passenger door, the front doors of the apartment complex were violently torn from their hinges. The creature held nothing back as it sprinted on all fours towards the car. Brian shifted the car into drive and floored it. Normally, the wintry road conditions would have evoked anxiety in me, But right now, I felt as though Brian wasn't driving fast enough. I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, watching the creature gallop towards us, its skinny form seemingly moving in unnatural angles with each step. "Are you alright?" Brian asked, of deep concern, his eyes trained on the road ahead. I, I think I broke my ankle. I managed to get out in between breaths. He cursed under his breath. "I don't think we can get you to a hospital in our current situation," Brian thought out loud. "Did you bring your phone?" I asked him. "I want to call the police." "Crap, no, I left mine at the apartment," Brian said, plainly. I quietly sobbed as I too had left my phone in the rush. "We're not going to make it tomorrow, are we?" I said out loud, not wanting an answer. "No, things are fine. We'll somehow make it out of this." "How? Will we actually?" I yelled at him, tears streaming down his face. He was terrified, just like me, and yet he was trying to protect me and keep me calm. I stumbled an apology in between sobs, but Brian cut me off. "It's gone." He slowed the car to a stop and looked all around. "Where did it go? It's just gone." I too began to look around, unease settling in. I'm not sure what was more horrific, seeing the creature pursue us or not being able to see it, but feel that it was still there. We sat there in the car for a long while, just looking around desperately. In the distance down the road, I noticed headlights. I pointed them out to Brian, and he flashed his high beams off and on. The car pulled over to the side of the road, and Brian got out to talk to the driver. I bit my lip, not enjoying the idea of Brian getting out of the car. "Please, call the police. We need an ambulance as well." I heard Brian talking to the driver. Just as Brian made his way back to the car, the creature came out of the darkness and took him in its grasp. It happened so quickly. He was just gone. Only a few drops of blood on the ground to prove that he was even there. The man in the car across the road screamed and sped off. I sat there, stunned and no doubt in shock. The monster rammed into my passenger side door head first, breaking me from my trance. It broke through the window and shoved its face towards me. I struggled against my seatbelt and repeatedly kicked it in, its hollow skull. I caught my leg in its mouth, and it clamped its jaws down. I screamed from the pain, blood pouring around my wounds. I heard the horrific sound of my leg being bitten as it crunched the bone. All I could do was scream. Biting down on my other leg, it pulled me through the window. I screamed for my life, but it was no use. With ease, it had flung me face first into a nearby tree, and everything went black instantly. My entire body seared with pain as blurry images of men and women in police uniforms and rescue uniforms loaded me onto a bed and into an ambulance. I was drifting in and out of consciousness. When I had finally come to full consciousness, I was in a hospital bed and hooked up to countless pieces of machinery. I had a feeding tube and an oxygen tube in me. My arm had an IV in it, heartbeat monitors attached to my chest. The nurse reading my file gasped when she saw me awake and rushed out of the room. The PA system announced several doctors to where I assumed I was located. Within minutes, the doctors were unhooking a feeding tube and oxygen tube, as I had no longer needed them. "We expected you to be in a coma for at least another month," one of the doctors explained to me after the tubes were removed. "Another month?" I asked before clearing my throat. It still felt as though I had those plastic tubes shoved down my throat. "You were out for 6 weeks. You were in a very brutal car accident. While waiting for the emergency services to arrive, you were attacked by an animal. It was a very horrible scene." I blankly stared at him. "Don't you remember, Christine?" He cocked his head to the side and gave me a quizzical look. "It's Christine," I corrected him. "And no, I don't. I lied." I laid there for hours, remembering the horrible nightmare that had happened to me nearly 2 months ago. My whole body ached and pulsed with pain. I could hardly move. I thought about Brian for the longest time. I assumed he had to be dead, but he had shown up later that night. "I came as soon as I heard that you were awake," he told me as he leaned over and kissed my forehead. "After the creature had attacked me, it went for you. I watched as it threw you against the tree. I tried to pull it off you, but it threw me away. It told me that it wanted you. It told me that you saw something that you weren't supposed to see," Brian explained. By the time the police and ambulance showed up, the creature had already left. I never saw it leave. It was just somehow gone. I rode with you in the back. The officers recorded it as a bear attack. They didn't believe my story. Brian went on to say that he was administered into the hospital for a day with only flesh wounds and stitches. He said that he and my brothers and parents visited me nearly every day or so. "My parents came?" I asked, stunned. He nodded, giving me a half smile. "In fact, they gave me a call on my way here. They're headed up with your brothers. They said that they'll try to get here before breakfast. When they got the call that you were awake, they pretty much dropped what they were doing and hopped in the car." I teared up and smiled. "What did you tell them about what happened?" "The police, they told them what they thought happened. I went with it because, I want them to like me." I giggled. Then I struggled to sit up. Brian rushed over to give help and sit me up. I reached down to scratch my leg, but I couldn't quite find a spot. "Hey, can you help me? I've got an itch and I can't reach it. I'm too sore to be reaching down." I looked at Brian, and he smiled back at me. "Sure. Where about?" "My left leg, just below the kneecap." Brian went pale suddenly. "What's wrong?" I removed blankets as a wave of adrenaline washed over me. Both of my legs were gone from just above the knees. I was still coping with my new handicap when my younger brothers, accompanied by my parents, rushed into the room and nearly knocked the wind out of me with a big hug each. I reassured them that I'm alright, and laughed a little out of happiness. My brother, through tears, exclaimed his relief that I had waken up. Apparently the doctors had told them that I might never wake from my coma. I tried to reassure him that I was fine now, and that doctors aren't always right. As I looked at my parents, I could see them holding back tears. They immediately began telling me that they love me, and that I should move in with them since now, I will need someone to take care of me. I'll have Gabe," I started. We actually moved back in with Mom and Dad, Gabe said, giving me a warm smile. I looked over to Brian, who gave me this "you should listen to them" look, with a smile to top it off. "I'll come back home when they let me out of here." I couldn't finish. I cried of happiness. My parents loved me after all. They embraced me in a hug each, and my dad stepped out of the room to talk to one of the nurses. I began talking to my mom about whatever topics came to mind when my brother interrupted and said that he had seen something very interesting on their drive here. He exclaimed, it was this bear-looking animal, but it was wearing this animal skull. I think it was a deer's skull, and the bear looked really skinny and tall. Isn't that something? My mom looked at me. I just looked to Brian. I knew I was probably as pale as he was in that moment. "I didn't see anything," Gabe stated, but I ignored him. "Yeah, it was freaky. Gabe missed it. I saw it too, but I don't think your father saw it." My mother's voice grew distant as I stared at Brian. "Are you okay? You don't look so good." Someone asked, but I wasn't sure who. "Maybe you should all go home early. I'll bring Chrissy back down when she's out of the hospital," Brian said. "You all have lives to get back to after all." "Oh, Brian, that's so sweet of you, but we'll pass. We've got a hotel room nearby, and we took the boys off of school," my mother said in her fake, cheery voice. I tried to interject in the most serious tone I could muster, but I don't think I was quite convincing enough. My family has seen the same thing that I did. Will it haunt them now as well? The next story has been posed by user darkly_gathers. Lost in a snowstorm, I have stumbled into an abandoned school, and now I don't think it's safe for me to leave. I squint through the snowstorm and look down to my watch, raising it a little closer to my face for a better look. But I don't know why I bother. It's just a force of habit, I guess. The watch is broken. It's always broken. I should replace it, really. After all, who wears a broken watch? I just can't bring myself to do so. It was passed down from my granddad through my brother. 3 different repair places have all turned me away and said it was impossible to fix. Too old, they say. But those just sound like excuses to me. But hey, what do I know? I shiver, and my gaze returns to my surroundings. I draw my coat a little tighter around my body. The storm rages. All around is snow, and an endless world of white, illuminated through the dark with a mist-blurred orange of the endless, dutiful street lamps. I carry on, trudging along my way. At the beginning of the night, right after the bus dropped me off, I considered waiting in the spot I was left behind, waiting for the driver to realize his error and come back and get me. But it was just too cold for standing outside. So I started walking down the road, following the bus's direction of travel. It's been a few hours now, and the bus never came back. So yeah. Hey, my name is Sam, by the way. I'm 15 and I'm lost in the snow. I didn't realize the mistake until the bus had driven away. The storm beyond the windows was far too thick. And hell, why shouldn't it be dropping me off in the right place? It's always the right place. Never, never, ever am I dropped off in the wrong location. Except for this evening, it would seem. This, the evening of the storm. I grimace and close my eyes tight shut against a sudden, barreling gust of icy wind. I have no idea where I am. Maps aren't working, but I should be okay. I'll just keep following the road until I find something I recognize. Soon, for sure. And so I walk. I walk and I walk. It's maybe 3 or so hours until I really start to feel the first stages of panic settling in. The air only feels like it's getting colder and colder, sharper and sharper. There's no one at home right now to come and collect me. So what am I supposed to do? I check my phone again as the battery steadily drops. The device shakes in my shivering hand. Come on, I mutter, grimacing, looking around for a countless time. Come on, give me something here, just something. And I squint. If I squint just right, there, through the blizzard, is a different kind of light. Faint at first, and paler than the orange of the street lamps, but it's different enough. Distinct, yellow and soft, spilling through the windows of a long building, a little ways back from the road. It could be an old office block or something. I decide to go for it, turning away from the road and trudging a path through the fallen snow to the building's entrance. As I approach, I realize that the building isn't an office at all. In fact, it's a school. Not mine, nor one that I recognize, but a school nonetheless. Damn, it's probably locked up tight. I think aloud as I reach the front doors, but to my surprise they push right open at my touch, and so I head inside. It's not particularly warm in here, but hey, at least it's out of the wind and the snow. My footsteps echo on the hard floor. The door closes with a thunk behind me, and the sounds of the weather are dulled. I draw down my hood and allow myself a breath. It fogs and clouds out into the surrounding airs, and I look around. The school's main lobby is illuminated like two of its off-shooting corridors, with a faint, warning yellow. The light in the third corridor is flickering silently, and the light of the fourth is non-existent. A dead dark and a picture of shadows. An unfamiliar emblem is embezzled on the wall to my left, above the motto, Ad Mortem, Ad Lucem. A disturbing sense of unease passes through me. The light flickers and the air chills. I try to clear my throat, but the noise sounds distant and far away. My breath clouds around my face, and the shadow, vast and long, swims into my field of vision across the walls and floor. Slowly, as if beneath a body of water, I turn my head. I turn to look behind me and stagger away in horror as fast as this newly thickened air will allow. Beyond the glass doors of the entrance, and drifting through the snow and shadows in the air, is a living nightmare. What appears, bizarrely, to be something akin to an enormous eel, black and creeping, slithering its way through the evening air as if the storm were at the bottom of the sea. Its jaws crack open, a slither, and as it passes by me, I see its teeth, grey and spiked and beyond count, its eyes fixed upon mine. It glows like the lights of the school, yellow, only brighter. The pupil of this great eel is rectangular, in the manner of a goat's, and deeper and darker and blacker than anything I've ever seen. To meet this thing's stare is to look back into the eye of the abyss. It drifts past the door at a right angle, its long and snake-like body following on behind, and I tear away my eyes. Shit, I stutter uselessly. No, and I turn tail and run, away from the doors and deeper into the building. I pass by a window to my right and see in my peripheral another dark shadow, a second of these creatures, perhaps, as it swims through the snowstorm outside. What is happening? I shout out loud, hoping to break through the sounds of my breathing and my beating heart as I tear down the hall and round corner after corner. I find myself drawn to a descending staircase, and so up I climb, after a quick check over my shoulder. I don't think the creatures can enter into the building, but the flickering lights and the dancing shadows are playing tricks on me. I climb quickly as I am able and crash down into the nearest classroom, fumbling and stumbling amongst the chairs and landing on the ground in the dark. I catch my breath. The only light comes through the glass in the classroom door and through the long wide window beside me. The blinds are open and the snowstorm rages beyond. The light of a street lamp, faint and far as it is, filters calmly inside. It illuminates the tips and edges of the chairs and tables. It casts a glossy, reflective shine across the artwork, presumably drawn and painted by students, hung on the walls. And across the hair of the girl, resting casually on the corner. Hey, she says with a smile, and I recoil in surprise. Who are you? I ask, stuttering. Sorry about eels. They're here for me, not for you, but best to avoid them all the same, she says, dodging the question and brushing a strand of hair from her face. She tucks it behind her ear. I realize that at some point I have bitten my lip, and it throbs painfully. I rub a thumb across the freshly forming bump. What's your name? I ask. What are you doing here? Are we safe? She shrugs. Pretty safe, I guess, for now. She glances to the window and gently kicks her heels against the counter. My name is Ellie. I'm just hanging out. Do you have a name? Yeah, of course I have a name, I reply, irritated. It's Sam. Is this your school then? She shrugs again. I guess. I guess? I glance from the door to the window and clamber up to my feet, taking a seat opposite to her on a nearby desk. My dumb teenage brain tries to work out if she's cute or not. She kind of is, I guess. More importantly though, I'm also trying to decide if her presence here has heightened or lessened the imminent danger. Could you just stop screwing around for a second? What is going on? Eels? There's massive eels in the snow. I ask, frustrated. They aren't actually eels, obviously. That would be stupid. They just look like eels, she replied in a strangely calm manner. So, what are they then? Why are they hanging around here? Around your school? She shifts and brings a hand up to her shoulder to rub her arm. Don't worry about it. It's not really your problem, she says dismissively. Not my problem? I repeat, eyebrows furrowed. Well, I would disagree. I throw out my hands in protest. Her tone shifts to a defensive one. If you're gonna just whine, then you can just go. I didn't ask for you to come here. I already told you. They aren't here for you. They're here for me. Ellie crosses her arms and stands up from the desk, turning and walking away to face the window. We both watch as the enormous shadow of one of the creatures drifts past the glass, temporarily throwing a coat of shadow across the room. The snow falls. Diplomacy. Remember. I rub my chin. I want answers here. All right, I say. I'm sorry. She turns back to look at me, and I speak on. I'm just really freaked out, okay? You seem a lot more in control of the situation. I'd like to be at least on the same level you are. I hold out my hand, and offer for her to shake it. A peace offering, if you will. And my grandfather's watch catches in the light. Her eyes dart to it at once, and her expression changes completely. She squeals a little and puts her face right close to it. That is beautiful, she says. Oh my goodness, where did you get this? Can I see it? Why is she not concerned by the monsters outside? Sure, here, take it. I unclasp it from my wrist and make it to hand it to her, but she takes a sudden step back. Oh, no, it's okay. If you could just set it down on the table, that would be great. I pause. You want me to just set it down on the table? She nods and smiles pleasantly. Right. I do as she asks, and instead of passing the watch directly to her, I instead place it gently down on the nearest desk. She rests on its surface, one hand on either side of the timepiece, and gets her face really close to it. You were wearing it on the wrong wrist, you know, she says as she studies the thing. I shrug again, irritated. Well, I'm left-handed. And it doesn't work, she asks me. It's broken? Why would you wear a broken watch? Even a broken watch is right twice a day. I reply, dryly, and to my surprise she actually laughs. I chuckle too, a little awkwardly in surprise. Sure, she says, sticking out her tongue. The shadow of the eel drifts past the window. Again, we are cast in shadow as it passes us by, swimming through the rush of the storm. Please, just tell me what's going on, all right? I say to her, my temporarily misplaced fear returning at full force. Come on, don't play with me. Are we actually in danger? Because I feel in danger. She ignores me, squinting carefully at the broken watch, muttering quietly to herself. Time, she says. It's such a funny thing. Hey, I say. Enough is enough. And I step forward. I reach out to grab her arm, but in my attempt, my hand passes right through her skin. her skin and body and everything else. She is massless, and I watch as my hand passes effortlessly right through her arm, translucent and flickering. After a moment of processing, I take a silent and horrified step back. She sighs and straightens, brushing that same strand of hair behind her ear. She no longer looks as solid, or indeed as grounded as she did mere moments ago. "I'm sorry you ended up here tonight," she says quietly. The wind whistles beyond the walls, and the snowstorm rages. Horror. It is a genre that and since you have been listening until the very end of this video, I'm assuming you as well, love. Whether it be true crime documentaries, horror movies, or games, they are all very enjoyable. But there's just something distinctly unique about true witness accounts, especially if these accounts are about cryptids. Although many people claim that the more you interact with this type of content, the more likely you are to attract it to yourself. I, however, sincerely doubt that, mainly because of my firm belief that the supernatural feeds off of belief. I consider myself a skeptic, and although I have created a channel meant for, at the moment, mainly true horror stories, I only partially believe in a very select few cryptids. But either way, I do hope you enjoyed my narrations. And even if you didn't, I want to wish you a good rest of your day.